podcast. My name's Lizzie, and today I am joined by Clare Luther, children's author specialising in spiritual and emotional well-being. And we're here today to find out more about what she does and to ask her some questions about her ministry and how she could offer some insights to support Christian teachers working in schools with an ever-increasing number of children seemingly suffering from emotional distress and concerns. So, Clare, it's lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Clare, just before we kind of dive into the meat of the topic, it'd be great to know a bit about you. Tell us a bit about your background and what you're currently doing working with schools and with children to support them.
Yes, so I am, I used to be an occupational therapist. So that was my primary vocation. I trained as an occupational therapist at Oxford Brookes. And I went on to have some jobs in musculoskeletal rehab and also neuro rehab, where I specialised in acquired brain injury. And my job involved a lot to do with communication with families and the patients themselves who had experienced life-changing accidents or illnesses. And I did that for a number of years whilst getting married and having a family. And I managed to carry on my career probably until my children were 3 and 5, at which point there was a complete crux in, am I coping being a parent full-time and doing my job? I decided that I wanted to kind of stay very much at the patient level. So I didn't go for promotions. I kept working on the floor with patients within the wards and stuff. And I really enjoyed that. But I did find it very difficult. My husband had taken a career change and he was absent from the home a lot. So I was single parenting with a full-time job. And it kind of came about that I went to part-time. And then I just realized that actually with one parent away so much and me working hard, it wasn't working for our children. I noticed that they were a bit emotionally unsettled. I was physically present, but I wasn't emotionally present. And I kind of had a moment of needing to refocus. So we got a lodger in. I started to do a bit of evening work, but home-based and juggling a few things. And I met a really lovely lady, and she was interested in doing picture books, and I love to write. I didn't know that at the time, but I journal. I loved writing reports. I love words, and came to put these stories together. And the way that they evolved were I ended up using them to parent my own children because they were literal, they were non-nuanced, and they had a purpose. And actually, there was a lot to do with my faith in that, although they're secular books, the emotional well-being books. Anyway, I kind of progressed with these books and started reaching out to local communities and saying, hey, would you like me to come and read to your nursery children? Got some books that are to do with emotions based on kind of animal characters and dogs. So I'd taken away culture, taken away ethnicity, just so we could focus on the content. And there was a really positive response. So what's happened over the last kind of 14 years is slowly there's been a kind of a growth really in people seeing the value in that they can get meaningful conversations started from the work. All of the books are themed specifically. So the way that I'm now working is visiting schools as an author, running workshops and having kind of discussions about big everyday emotions. My heart really is to help children, but probably more importantly, help parents, because the books have got questions at the back. I want that kind of supervised reader to be having those conversations with the children about exploring and expressing things that are everyday moments that don't have to be a crisis point. And yeah, it just seems to be a really kind of valuable way of using my time and working with people. So that's kind of how I've ended up doing what I'm doing now.
Okay, wow, thanks, Claire. That's a great introduction. I feel like we've got to know loads about you. Why do you think, though, that emotional well-being is something that we could be or we should be tackling in schools? Do you not think that teachers have enough to deal with? And how does your role how does it support the role of schools?
Yeah, I definitely acknowledge that teachers are time tight and you have so much to do. And trying to focus on emotional well-being is difficult. But I also think that if we understand what emotions are, their feelings and their reactions or responses to an experience, they're how we put meaning onto something or associate something. And more often than not, with children, we will tend to see a behavior that is the outcome of what they're experiencing. And our focus is very much on dealing with the behavior. And I guess my desire and my longing is really to start from source, to say, why is this child behaving in this way? And what can I be doing just in my basic dialogue or interaction with them to reassure them or offer them comfort? Not necessarily to fix, but just to ensure that they feel secure, that they're not humiliated, that they don't feel belittled. And it doesn't require kind of much extra time. I think a lot of us feel fooled sometimes that it's going to take too long to do that. But actually, as quick as the harsh words come out, the kind words can come out. And that makes a significant difference. So I think dealing with emotions is tricky. But if we're aware as an adult what we're saying and the impact that will have on a child, I think we would see different outcomes for how they're managing themselves at school. Again, that's a sweeping statement. I say that because I've observed it in my own sessions. So we have some children that are finding it difficult to concentrate or difficult to attend, but using a specific way of communication, more than not, the child will stay with me in the workshops and attend well. And so I think, well, if I'm observing it and I'm using my framework in practice, then I really think there is some room for us to be educated and encouraged and thanked for what we're doing already, but how could we do it in a different way?
One of the things that I've noticed is that we're having increasing discussion in society about emotional and mental well-being, and it's certainly something we hear from our members. We do an ACT member survey every year, and alongside their own issues with stress and burnout and workload, on the mental health perspective, we're also seeing an increased reporting of possible mental health disorders amongst children and young people, members seeking support for children who are emotionally struggling. Do you think there has been an increase in emotional distress? And where does that kind of tip over from being struggling with emotional well-being into a mental health problem? Because I was doing a little bit of research ahead of time. According to a survey a couple of years ago, almost 20% of children aged 7 to 16 have a probable mental disorder, an identifiable mental health problem.
Yeah, I think it's a fine line. I'm no expert, so I'm not going to say that I'm speaking with any authority. I'm just speaking from observation and experience and reading. But it appears to me that with a young developing brain, they are ripe for making connections and they are ripe for experiencing kind of relationships which help them understand the world and understand themselves better. And if we are amidst a kind of a situation or an environment that doesn't nurture that, then I think it's difficult for the children to develop a healthy emotional kind of growth to their own system. And I think when there's repeated dysfunction or a lack of explanation or exploration of your emotions, then it can move from being an emotional experience to then a kind of an overall general mental health issue, which leads to stress or not coping. The whole point of me focusing on emotional well-being is I'm interested in looking at how can we recognize what we're feeling? How can we physiologically recognize what our bodies are telling us? And how do we manage that? So how can we look at the bounce back of going through a stressful event or a happy event or something and recover from that? And what I'm observing is that a lot of children aren't educated or helped or kind of come alongside to see them through that. And I think with the financial pressures, with cost of living pressures, and with phones, our children are not able to see something through as well as they were able to perhaps in the past. There are going to be things in all eras that are going to cause us problems. We are chaotic beings. We know that. We're in a kind of a fallen world. So that is clear. But I do think that we are quick to fix now. And we don't have the time or skills maybe to help our children see emotions through, perhaps because of how we were parented. So we're kind of doing a cut and paste parenting. We are, doing what we're used to. I think a lot of us, and hands up, you don't realize what kind of a family unit you've had until you either get older and compare yourself and see families from a different perspective, or indeed have families yourself and then realize how you're parenting and what seems normal to you, and you look at your partner or husband or wife and think, well, why are they doing it that way? You suddenly realize there was definitely a way of doing things in your own home. So
that is so true. I can't agree with that anymore. That's yeah.
So I think I'm trying to with our children, rather than looking at them, I'm trying to say, let's look at us first and how we can help them with their emotional growth. And my way of doing that is through resourcing through stories, because I think a lot of us find it difficult to know where to start. So I'm trying to say, listen, I'm just going to give you a place to start, and from that can roll out this. So I think in schools, with the emotional aspect, a lot of children come with a very different morning, a very different family setup, and then they're thrown into school and they have to concentrate. They haven't been able to express or tell people what's going on. They feel something, but they don't know how to kind of use the words, the emotional vocabulary. And then on top of that, you might have you're being told off, or you're being put somewhere and you're just too tired. And then it just all kicks off, and so it becomes a behavior. And then the best that we can do with the time that we have is to try and discipline the behavior. And I think that kind of ends up being through nobody's fault, but we're going down this road. And I think, it's just working out how can we make small changes to make a big difference just in our conversation in the classroom.
So, I mean, I cannot wait to have a chat, a more in-depth chat about your stories. Just to kind of set the context again for us, though. Yeah. What would you say would be some of the outworkings of these problems, talking or not talking about emotions, or not being able to express? I mean, can you give us any sort of examples, obviously, of children who reach a particular point as a result of not being able to express or understand their emotions properly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure any teacher listening to this will recognize the child that shows off, the child that wants all the attention, the child that wants to be first in the queue, the child that can't stop crying, the child that wants to go to the loo but doesn't want to come back into the classroom, the child that is upset that their carer has gone away for the day and they can't cope with that anxiety. The child that speaks over and wants to shout out all the answers to be seen. The child that looks really frustrated and cross and makes a point that they're not happy with the decisions I'm making in me leading the workshops. And you will get that the whole time. But the way that I've written these books has a framework in them. And I use that framework in my dialogue when I'm talking with the children. And as I said, more often than not, it will recognize the problem, it will acknowledge and help the child explore, and it will reassure them so that their behavior has calmed. So with that framework, that's how I do all my work. And teachers get to see that in practice. And then what I tend to do is talk separately with teachers if they want that after my workshops, so that I can show them how I'm using this toolkit that I've kind of created that helps promote emotional health and emotional growth. So with the child that doesn't want to hear a story to do with separation anxiety because they can't take what the story is, where the story is taking them, they might back away or say they need the loo or their tummy's hurting. But I know exactly the point in the story at which they're responding to, and they're recognizing that they can't stand their mum or their caregiver leaving them, because there's a point in the story where a dog gets left in a hotel for the day with daycare. But you observe the children listening to the story, and because they're relatable and recognizable, you can pinpoint at which point a child is is uncomfortable with what I'm talking about. All of them have been written with educational and clinical psychologists, with teachers, with SENs, with parents, with caregivers, with counsellors, with conservationists. Even though my books have literally 4 lines on a page, the care and attention to detail I put into them means that when a 3-year-old hears them, or an 8-year-old, or a 14-year-old, if you want to, they will always be able to relate, and the language is very clear and simple, but relatable. So yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the books? What topics do you tackle? What kind of nuances are brought out, and how do you use them in practice? Do you then use them and sort of question the children, or do these conversations just occur kind of organically?
So each page has a purpose, and each page has something that is either physiologically happening or emotionally. So the topics that I cover, there's 2 sets. There's one called The Little Paws Hotel, and they are looking at big everyday emotions. So you've got separation anxiety, fear of new experiences, perfectionism, being bullied, the bully, and bereavement. And then you have another series which is looking at core values or character development, and that is to do with kindness, acceptance, perseverance, gratitude, and respect. And when I open these stories, it is very much an ongoing, interactive, engaging dialogue. So I will ask questions on each page, I will act out, I've got puppets, and I will ask them to use their imaginations to either predict what word might rhyme, they're all rhyming words, or what might be on the next page, or looking at empathy, because we know empathy is a learned skill. How may this character feel? Have you ever felt like this? What might you do if you saw this in the playground? So I'm constantly getting them to reference different scenarios, everyday situations that they can think, oh yeah, I recognize that, and make suggestions. And I will also give them an example of a worry that I may have experienced that day, so that they can see how I problem solved, because I think to be able to apply with examples is really important. So yeah, it's kind of a mixture of things dependent on the age and dependent on the group that I have. I had a school visit the other day with World Book Day, and there were, I think, about 20 children who had special needs. And so there was a high ratio of adults in there as well. And, you know, there was just a very kind gesture to say this might be a bit difficult to keep them attending for so long. You know, it's half an hour. And I was like, of course, you know, I'm very happy to do what is right, and I'll wrap it up. And I think all of them attended for 30 minutes, and we had everyone engaged, and it was just so exciting to see that something that wasn't thought would be possible was just through using really kind of overt dialogue and again this framework. So it's, you know, I've created this talking toolkit, as I've said, and it's called the Daisy Dialogue, and the book for that is coming out in May. But it's a way of showing people how I work and how I use my books to have conversations to elicit and promote emotional growth. And the interesting thing about kind of working with schools and then going on to have teacher and parent talks is people, and then I can talk to them about it, and we can look at having a really kind of good question and answer time to play out, how would I do this in my classroom, or how would I do this at home, to kind of look at the long-term building and growing emotionally kind and capable adults.
So could you perhaps elaborate, or maybe give us an example of one particular strategy from the Daisy Dialogue?
I think the Daisy Dialogue, the way that I've spelt Daisy is Daesy, and I've put the A and E in there on purpose because the framework looks at words beginning with A and E. And the idea is, when we think of A&E, we think of going to hospital, immediate care, and that's kind of what I'm saying with our dialogue. In that moment, there needs to be some immediate care done to help the child understand and process and explore what's going on. So a classic example for me, one of my go-to words is acknowledge. So if there's a child that's finding it difficult to concentrate or wants to be the center of attention, actually what I will do is acknowledge them and say, thank you so much for showing me your interest. I can see that you're sitting on your bottom, but you're wanting to tell me things. If we can get to the end of the story, I will be the first to ask you a question. And for some kids, that keeps them going, or I will acknowledge I can see a frown on your face. That tells me you're feeling a bit cross. Can you tell me what you feel cross about? And look to address and explain, another A&E word. Sometimes in our hurry, we forget what they haven't pieced together and they're not able to bridge and experience. And so just by addressing and explaining, the child is reassured. They've been seen, they've been validated, they've been heard, and that's enough. Often a child will keep going because they haven't had that acknowledgement. So it's nipping it in the bud and giving them that unmet need there and then, which takes no more time than it does to get cross. So it's just a kind of a reframing of it. And I think, yeah, my two big words are acknowledge and encourage. A child always responds to being encouraged, and kind words go a long way. So even when we're feeling exasperated, and our assumption or expectation of them, another A&E, is that they should be able to, we need to kind of reset ourselves and say, actually, have they had enough information to help them make sense of this, to understand what I'm expecting? You know, one of the classics is, oh, you know, I told my kids to put their shoes on this morning, they just didn't, but we go to school every morning. And I said, yeah, I understand that. But at 3 or 4, their ability to plan and sequence and read the road ahead may not be what we assume it to be. So they just need a gentle reminder to put their shoes on. And then over time, this kind of repetition will become a teachable moment and they'll do it. But our assumption is they should know, and then we get cross, and then our child gets a bit fearful. And that's just kind of a small example, but you know, I think it can be applied to anything. And one time when I was visiting, there was a child that was crying outside, and I was waiting in the hall, and I could hear that they were really distressed about meeting someone new. So I popped my head around the corner and just said, I can see everybody's lining up so nicely, but there is one child that's feeling a bit upset. Can I come and say hello? So I went to them and said hello. And people might say, oh, Claire, you're singling them out. Actually, children are much better at being acknowledged. So I went up and said, listen, I think you're being really brave. My name's Claire. Have a look at my face. And when I go back in there, you'll be able to recognize me. And can you wave hello to me? And they came in and they were still a bit upset. I hadn't fixed it, but I waved to them and they waved to me. And I said, are you okay to sit here for the story time? I'd really love you to listen. And that was it. Job done, you know. So yeah, it's the small things that we think might take up our time, but make a huge difference to the kids.
So this is all really inspirational, Claire, and it's really got me thinking. I mean, I'm a trained secondary teacher. Often I would, when I come across kind of difficult problems in the classroom that have arisen from my expectations not being met, I've perhaps not initiated the best conversations. They perhaps could have been thought through a bit more sensitively. But I also have 2 children. And I certainly know that that some of these principles I'll be looking into in a bit more detail. I don't think anyone could argue listening to your reflections and to your ideas. They're great for helping children who struggle perhaps to talk about big everyday emotions, and I'm sure that you see excellent results when you frame this dialogue in the way that you do. Is it though that we could, as Christian educators, bring that overarching perspective, a biblical perspective, into some of this? Could this be seen as a bit of a sticking plaster? How can Christ fit into these interactions, and should they be bringing Christ into these?
Well, as a Christian, the answer is yes. I think Christ is the most wonderful teacher and model, and we have his spirit to help transform our hearts. God can do anything, nothing is impossible for him. And I think how we interact and relate to people can be a beautiful way of showing Christ, even though people don't know that that's who our kind of motivator is and who we're serving. I think patience and compassion, empathy, everything we see in the Bible of Jesus and how he treats people is exactly how we can do life in difficult situations. And we know that even if we're pushed to the limits and we don't behave in the way that we are happy with, we get the chance to reflect and say sorry to a loving and forgiving God, where he does bring to our mind and our conscience ways that we behave that probably aren't as good as they could be. So I think in our manner and in our behavior choices, in our attitude, that's how we show Christ. We can show his kingdom by how we treat others. And then alongside that with the books, I've got activity packs, which are kind of craft and game orientated and secular, but also packs that are very overtly Christian. So with separation anxiety, for example, I've done a pack where God cares about our worries, and I use a verse in Peter to base that teaching on. And I've written a script, so I'm basically spoon feeding people who don't have time to think about how we can bring God into thinking about our worries. If we're not able to do that in our schools and be so overt with our faith, these packs are for free and we can download them, but we can certainly do some reading as an adult to work out how we can chat about things in a way that shows that we can trust God, or asking for help from someone, a trusted adult. So I think in my work, it's very evident that God is at work, and the joy about not being so over with the books and saying that there's a Christian ethos behind it is that everybody can relate to treating others as you'd like to be treated, to kindness, to acceptance, to honesty, to empathy, to coming alongside someone, to supporting someone. There is no child and no adult that will not agree with these principles and these values. And so I know I feel really excited that even if it isn't that I'm doing overtly Christian work and mentioning Jesus or God, that all of my work is based on biblical truth and God's kingdom.
I was just thinking through how through the kind of distinctiveness of applying these principles, we can be that kind of ambassador of Christ. So would you say then, you were saying that you're kind of going back to Christian virtues and Christian values, would you say that the Bible does give us any particular guidance for the challenge of supporting young people in our classrooms who might be particularly struggling with emotional distress?
I think there is no particular strategy in the Bible, but God is very clear about how we are to behave with children. We're to treat them with respect, and obviously they are to honor us as well. But how we communicate with them, I think, is clear with how Jesus often references, "Come to me as children." He knows our mind, he knows our heart, he knows that we want to relate, he knows that we flourish when we're in good, healthy, secure relationships. That's what he offers us. And I think as an adult, if we can be that trusted person that is different, that is kind, that doesn't make judgment, that is open and willing to acknowledge who that child is and give them the time just to explain and address what's going on, show empathy, be prepared to apologize, offer restoration and repair, then they will pick up your authenticity. I think sometimes I get amazed at how quickly the children trust me, but my absolute kind of go-to for myself is to be authentic and show them my vulnerability. Say what I'm feeling so that they can see it for themselves. I was in a bit of a traffic jam. That means I've arrived a little bit worried that I would be late. But actually now I'm in front of you, my worries aren't so big, and I'm really pleased that you're all smiling at me because I feel really welcome. And they're like, ooh, okay. And so they kind of try really hard to make me feel welcome. And again, it's just the small details that people might say, well, Claire, you have no idea what my life's like, the pressure, the stress. And sometimes maybe I don't. And I put my hands up to that. But I have also been in a lot of situations because of my therapy job and because of my schoolwork that has exposed me to very difficult and deprived situations where there is huge desperation. And children respond to someone showing them safety and security where they can be acknowledged and encouraged. And I am not saying, and I've said this earlier, I'm not out to fix. I've got the long game in mind. One interaction is not going to change anything. But over a period of time, if we can educate ourselves and encourage ourselves and say, yes, this is really difficult and we're not going to get this right. We are not perfect, but we are doing the best that we can. In that, again, I really think we can make a difference.
One last question before I come on to chatting about how we can get hold of your resources and your books. Is there perhaps an argument that if we build up the self-esteem of a child to such an extent that they can't see perhaps their need for Jesus or their need to admit their brokenness, their vulnerability, and their sinfulness, can that sometimes be problematic?
Well, I can only answer that if you're asking me as a teacher or as a parent. So as a teacher, I think it's very difficult because we are there on a day-to-day basis within restricted hours. As a parent, it's very different. And I don't affirm any behavior. I've got very clear boundaries on what I think and I believe from the Bible is right and wrong. And I'm not ever poring over my children saying you're really good, and kind of doing a performance rated kind of affirmation. What I do say is, I don't like how you snatch that book from me. Actually, I can see that you want it, so I'm going to give it back to you, and I'm going to I'm going to take it back from you, and then I'm going to ask you to ask me, and I will gladly give it to you. So what I'm doing at any point is highlighting what I think the behavior that isn't kind is going on, what their motive was for getting it or getting there, and then asking them to think about a different way of doing it. And I think we have to be really clear with our boundaries, in that we don't just go pumping up a kid and then we've got this peacock walking around thinking, I don't have to worry about how I am because I'm told God loves me or I'm loved. Or yes, you are. There's a book about acceptance. Yes, you are. You've been made by God. You are intrinsically special. But there is also a way of serving others and behaving in a way that puts others first. And this is what this looks like, because with a developing brain, they don't know what that looks like yet. They need us to show them examples. And again, a big part of the Daisy dialogue for me is, what are our assumptions and expectations? Most of us will say to our kids, that's not very kind. So that statement, that's not very kind, I don't know what you're talking about. We've just seen a behavior, but you're not clear as an adult what that is. And you also said not very kind. So as a child, making sense of what is kind. So I would say, I would address and explain it. I can see that you've hit your sister because you want the piece of Lego, and that is not very kind. Can you please tell us what you want, and then we'll give you the piece of Lego. They might run off crying. It doesn't matter. The point is, you're starting to introduce a dialogue that shows them where that behavior has come from, what has kick-started it, and what they've ended up doing, which then equals not very kind.
Sure.
And they need us to explain this. So as they get older, it becomes less dialogue, but clearer. And we get to the source of the problem, not the behavior, which is the outcome.
Yeah. That's so helpful, because that's often what I hear myself saying to my children when they're arguing and their sinfulness is spilling out of them. I will focus on, that was a horrible thing to do to your sister, or that was a horrible way to speak to your brother in those situations. And I love as well the way that you kind of described pumping up someone to be like a peacock. I think we often do that, and it does children a disservice. But I also like the way that we can reflect on what the Bible truly says about the generosity of Christ in allowing children to come to him, and how we are to be like that in our interactions. So just really quickly then, or not too quickly, can you give us a bit of a rundown of resources, how we might use them? I guess I'm thinking particularly about primary school practitioners, teachers, and which resources in particular you would recommend to kind of start with?
Yeah, so I work mainly with early years and early key stage 2. So early years right up to early key stage 2. I have been asked to work with years 3 and 4 as they get a bit older because the content is really relevant. But then I just kind of change my discussion. But the idea is that you've got these rhyming books that you can use to read to a child. They haven't got the subject on the back of them because I want them to be normal, everyday conversations. I don't want us to think, ooh, let's read Olive because that's about anxiety. And the kids will think, well, why are we all reading about anxiety? I just wanted to be a story about Olive.
Yeah.
So, and you can have dialogue throughout the story, or you can have dialogue at the end. There's questions at the back. And then each story, all 11 of them, have a resource pack, which is classroom-based activities and crafts. They're all photocopyable. And then the other ones are overtly Christian. And you can swap and change as you want. I mean, sometimes even in a Sunday school, these books are being used just as a story time. But then because the kind of adult has read the pack, they know how to take that and lead them to Christ through that. So yeah, they're all kind of free and downloadable on my website, and the books you can get there. I don't sell on any other platform. Mainly from a business perspective, I can't afford to. There's quite a lot of percentage that gets taken away.
Sure.
So I try and keep it under one roof, which is under my kind of website.
And what is that?
So it's www.clareluther.co.uk, and my name Clare is spelt without an I, so CLARE. So clareluther.co.uk, and more often than not that when I go visiting schools, they've obviously asked for me to send some books ahead, and they're in the libraries, and the children have been reading them. And when I come in, they will often say, I felt like Gus today, or, you know, I've said some really kind words, not like Tessa. They kind of are relating their own experiences, or, you know, you're being mean like Peggy is, and I don't like it. So they can see ways of behaving. One of the books that I think gets a lot of kids talking is Why Someone Might Be a Bully. So we know hurting people hurt, but there's not much literature that goes on that. So I've wanted to kind of help children have compassion for why someone might be being mean or repeatedly unkind, because home life is really difficult. We don't know what's going on, and that kid's coming in maybe unfed or isolated or having a really tricky time. And actually, maybe they need kindness from us. We're not saying that we're accepting the bullying, but actually, let's have a think about why they might be being unkind. So yeah, there's just different conversations that come up from it. But in circle time or discussion time, it's a good way of getting the kids to resource for themselves, to use their imagination and creation about what might be happening in the story.
Sure, thank you. Oh, Claire, well, this all sounds absolutely fab. I'm going to go and I'm going to have a look at the resources and probably use them at home with my own kids.
Well, you know, it's interesting to kind of see it evolve, and I think now that the Daisy Dialogue is coming out and kind of underpinning the framework, people will be able to see clearly how I've been writing these books, which I think is really exciting. You know, it kind of takes a long time to get there, but God has been really kind.
He has indeed. Thank you so much, Claire. Really, really appreciate your time.